Hey guys, I have a new project for you today. I'm going to try and get it done in one video, but no promises. We may have to extend it a little. But we're going to be building an Ionic 3 mobile weather app, and we're going to do this by using the W Underground Weather API. So we can use it to get weather from anywhere in the world. So we're going to create a service provider to reach out to that API with a specific city and state, and it's going to return the weather conditions, the degrees, humidity, and even an icon to represent the current conditions. So hopefully you enjoy this project, and let's go ahead and get started. This video is sponsored by Dev Mountain. If you're interested in learning web development, iOS, or UX design, Dev Mountain is a 12-week design and development bootcamp intended to get you a full-time job in the industry. To learn more, visit devmountain.com or click the link in the description below. Alright guys, so I have a couple things I want to go through before we get started. Now, if you have no idea what Ionic is, it's a framework for building mobile apps with web technology, so HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and it also gives us a complete UI framework with toolbars, buttons, lists, and all that kind of stuff, kind of like Bootstrap does and some of the other front-end frameworks. Now, Ionic 3 also uses Angular 4 as its JavaScript framework. So if you're comfortable with Angular 4, then you should catch on really quickly. If you've taken my Angular 4 front to back course, which I'll put a link in the description, you should have no problem understanding most of this stuff. We're going to be working with components and services, except in Ionic they're also referred to as pages and providers. Alright, now if you have no experience with Ionic or Angular, I'm going to do my best to try and explain things as we move along, but I can't go over every single line of code and every single concept and still be able to put together a working project in any decent amount of time. So please keep that in mind. It's just not possible. But I will do my best to try and explain what's going on. And by no means am I saying if you don't know Angular or Ionic, then don't watch this. You should definitely still watch it, maybe even a couple times, so you can really get it through your mind how this stuff works. Now, you probably noticed that I am on a Windows machine. Ionic is completely cross-platform. You can build your application and you can compile it to iOS as well as Android. However, if you're on a Windows machine, you can't test it on iOS. Okay, if you're on a Mac, you can test it on the iOS simulator, but on Windows you can't. So we'll be testing it in the Android SDK and the Android virtual device. Alright, now with that said, you don't even have to install the Android SDK or any of that to be able to build and test your application, because Ionic actually comes with its own dev server. Alright, now where you would have issues with this is if you're building an application that uses some of the APIs to work with the device utilities like the camera or the geolocation, things like that. But for what we're doing, where we're just using an external weather API and also something called Ionic Storage, which are both just fine for working with the browser and working with the dev server. So we're not even going to deal with the Android SDK or any of that until the end. Alright, once we finish the application, we'll test it on the Android virtual device, and we'll get into that, and I'll explain that a little bit. And if you are on a Mac, you can then test it on the iOS simulator, which is actually a little bit easier than setting up the Android virtual device. Alright, but I'll talk about that later. I just want to get the application built. We can test it on the dev server, and then we'll go from there. Okay, now if you're going to be testing on the Android SDK, you will need to download Android Studio, but you don't have to worry about that just yet. What you do need installed now is Node.js, so if you don't have that, go to nodejs.org. Go ahead and download and install it if you don't have it already. If you're any kind of web developer, you probably already do. And then you also need to sign up for an API key at wunderground.com/weather/API. Alright, once you sign up, you just want to sign in, and then you'll have some options up here. If we go to key settings, you'll see your API key. And if we go to documentation, this has all the documentation. It also gives you an example endpoint here. So basically, we have the api.wunderground.com/API/ and then whatever your key is, /condition/Q for query, and then the state and the city. So in this case, we're looking at the weather for San Francisco, California. And if we say show response, it's going to give us all the stuff back, such as the location info, the degrees in where is it, Celsius, Fahrenheit. We have the wind, the pressure, the dew point, all this stuff you're able to put in your application, even the icon URL for whatever the conditions are. All right. So let's quickly look at what we'll actually be building. Let me just go to the home screen here. So this is actually running on the Android SDK or the Android virtual device, and it runs exactly like it would run on a real Android device. Okay, so basically we have the home screen here, which has the location, the city. It has the conditions, mostly cloudy. Has a little icon that will go along with the condition. Has the degrees in Fahrenheit in a large font here, and then it also has the Fahrenheit and Celsius here. It has a humidity, dew point, visibility, heat index. So this is all stuff that's coming from that API. All right, now we have some tabs down here. If I go to About, it's just going to be the app name, the version, and description. Now, this wouldn't be too useful if we had to if it was always Boston, Mass. So what I've done is I've created a settings page where we can change the location here. All right, so let's go ahead and just change this to, let's say, we'll say Orlando, Florida. And we'll say Save Changes, and then that's going to change the home page. If I click home again, you'll see it'll now change to Orlando. All right, and if I go back to settings, you'll see that it's Orlando, Florida, and we can change this to whatever we want. All right, so that's the application that we'll be building. It's not too advanced, but it's something that hopefully we can get through in one or maybe two videos. So now that we have all of that stuff out of the way, I'm going to close this up, and we're going to go ahead and get started from scratch. Alright, so I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code as my editor, and then I'm also using a tool called Git Bash, which I'm going to, let's see, I guess I'll just open it up. Okay, so Git Bash is a better command line tool for Windows. Okay, and obviously it comes with the Git version control system. Now you don't have to use this. If you're on Windows, you can use your standard command prompt or PowerShell or something else. If you're on Mac or Linux, of course, use your terminal, whatever you'd like. But I'm going to be using this. And then I also have it integrated into my editor, which I'll show you later on. But first thing we want to do is we want to install Ionic, and we want to install something called Cordova, which is basically a wrapper that's going to allow our Ionic application to be built out to an iOS app and to an Android app. So we're going to go ahead and say npm install, and we're installing this globally. So right now it doesn't matter what directory you're in. We want to do -G for global, meaning that it's going to be installed on the system so that we can use it anywhere at all. All right, and then we want to do Ionic. And it's very important if you want Ionic 3 to do @latest. Okay, so you want to do Ionic @latest. And then you also want to install Cordova globally. All right, so let's go ahead and run that. That's the very first command that you should be running. All right, and mine went a little quicker because I actually already have it installed, both of those. But now what we want to do is we want to go to wherever you want to create your project folder. Okay, I have a folder called Projects that I'm going to CD into. All right, and then from here we want to create our Ionic application, and we can do that by just saying Ionic start and then naming our application. I'm just going to call this iWeather, and then we want to choose a template. You can choose a basic template to start with, and we're going to choose tabs. Okay, remember we had those 3 tabs at the bottom. This is going to set it up for us so that we have those by default. All right, so let's go ahead and run that. And it's going to ask some questions here. Would you like to integrate your new app with Cordova? Yes, we're going to say yes, or enter. And this could take a couple minutes. So what it's doing is it's going to generate the entire application structure, all the dev tools. It's going to generate the entire Angular 4 application, which runs on under Cordova, or I'm sorry, under Ionic. It's going to set all that stuff up for us. All right, so now that that's done, it's telling us to, where is it? It's going to tell us to CD into the folder, or maybe it doesn't tell us. Yeah, right here. So CD into iWeather. So let's go ahead and do that, or whatever you called it. And you should now be able to start the dev server by simply saying Ionic serve. Alright, so that's going to start up. By default, it's going to be port 8100, and it should just open up the browser. Alright, so here's our application running in the browser. Now I'm just going to make it smaller so it looks kind of like a mobile app. And we'll just go ahead and put it here. Actually, you know what we'll do is we'll snap this to the edge here. We'll put Visual Studio Code here. And let's make this smaller. Now this command line, I'm just going to let the server run. And then what I'll do is open up my terminal inside Visual Studio Code once I open the project, and we'll do our generators and stuff from there. Okay, if you don't have Visual Studio Code with an integrated terminal, just go ahead and open up another terminal window. Alright, now I'm going to open up the folder, the app folder. So I put it in, whoops, I was just there. I put it in projects and then iWeather, and we'll open that up. So now we have all of our files on the side here. Let's close that up. And basically everything that we're going to be paying attention to is in the source folder. Okay, and if you're, like I said, if you're familiar with Angular, Angular 2, Angular 4, it's very, very similar. If we look in app, you'll see the app component TS file. You'll see the app module.ts file, which is kind of like the meeting place for all of our components and service providers and things like that. And it looks very similar to an Angular application. Well, I mean, it is Angular, that's why it looks similar. But some of this stuff might look familiar, such as ng module. Okay, so when we create a component or a page, we bring it in and then we put it into the declarations. For instance, the about page. These are pages or components that were created by default, kind of like a boilerplate. If we look over here, we have our home, we have our about page, and they also give us this contact page. Okay, so a page is basically a component. And just like with the Angular CLI, we can generate pages or generate components. We can also generate services, also called providers. All right, so let's see, what else do we need to look at here? We have our pages folder. So this is where all the pages are. When I say pages, they're pretty much components. For instance, about, you'll see that there's an about.ts file, just like with Angular, and we bring in our component, we have our decorator, we have the selector, the template URL, which is in this case about.html. We have our class, we have our constructor. It also brings in the nav controller so we can do redirects and things like that. And if we look at the about HTML, this is where the Ionic framework really kicks in as far as the UI framework. We have the Ion header, Ion navbar, which is this part right here, and then the content. You know, the about page is actually empty. You can see it's empty. If we go to our home HTML, it has some content inside the Ion content tag. All right, now we're not going to focus too much on the UI components. I may do some kind of crash course later on, like I do with, you know, Bootstrap and Foundation, but we're really focusing on just building this application. I'm not focusing on explaining every aspect of Ionic or anything like that. All right, so it's more of a code along with explanation than, you know, a full crash course type tutorial. All right, so what we're going to do here is we want to basically get rid of the contact tab here. We're going to have a settings in place of it, as you saw in the final version. The home page we're going to keep, and that's where we're going to have the information that comes in from the API. All right, now to work with the API, we're going to create a service or a provider, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Right now what I want to do is get our tabs set up, so we're going to create a settings component or a settings page and add that to the tab. I'll show you how to do that. So let's go ahead and open up another terminal. I'm going to use my integrated terminal, and to open that I just did Control and then the tilde, which is to the left of the #1 key. You can also go to View Integrated Terminal. Alright, so what I'm going to do here is use the generator to create a new page. Okay, so I want a new page in this directory. Of course, you could create it manually and you could add these files, but you really don't want to do that. So let's go ahead and say Ionic G, so generate, and we want to generate a page, which is also an Angular component, and we're going to call this page settings. Alright, so let's go ahead and run that. And then over here, you'll see a settings folder pop up with all these files in it. We have our TypeScript file. Okay, Angular uses TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript. Gives us our HTML, which is pretty much empty. Gives us an SCSS file because we use Sass by default, which is a CSS precompiler. And then settings.ts is the main component file. So when we want to start to work with the settings page and we want to add our form to change the location and all that, it's all going to go inside that file. All right, now what we need to do when we add a new page or a new component, we have to go to our app.module.ts file and we have to add it here. You'll see we have our about page, contact, all the default pages are already there. Now, when you're using the Angular CLI in an Angular application, it automatically adds components to this file. Unfortunately, it does not do that with Ionic. So we're going to just add that ourselves. So we're going to go right down here and say import settings page. And that's going to come from /pages/settings/settings. Okay, so that's the file right here. So in pages, settings, and then the settings TS file. That's what we're loading here. And then when we add a page, we need to bring it down into declarations as well. So let's go right here and say settings page. All right, and then that should be it. Actually, no, we need to put it in entry components as well. So settings page, and then we can save this file and close it up. All right. Now I want that settings page to be added to the tabs down here. Now notice if we look in the pages folder, there is a tabs folder and we want to go into tabs.ts. Okay, so any page we want to add to the tab we have to bring in. You'll see it already brought in these 3 pages. So let's go ahead and import our settings page. Some spaces there, and then we'll say from // we want to go out one folder into settings and then the settings component, okay, or page. And then down here we're going to change tab 3 root, change it from contact page to settings page, and we'll save that. All right, and then the next thing we want to do is go into tabs.html and we just want to change let's see, so tab title. Right here, we'll change contact to settings. We'll also change the tab icon. I'm going to change that to COG, to cog, which will give it a gear icon. So let's save that. Okay, it automatically regenerates, and down here now you can see we have settings with the cog. Is that? Yeah, that's a cog. And we'll click it, and now it shows the settings page. All right, so it's as easy as that to create a new page or a new component and then add it to the tabs if you want. So let's close up those tabs files, and now we're going to edit our, let's edit the about page. Okay, so it's going to be very, very simple, so I think that's a good place to start. So let's go to about.html, and I'm actually going to be using the grid. Okay, Ionic actually has its own grid system. We're going to use that for all of our pages. So inside the ion content tag, we're going to put in ion-grid. Okay, we're going to put an ion grid tab, and then inside here we need a row. So we'll say ion-row. Works pretty similar to the Bootstrap system. And then we need a column. So we'll say ion-col. And I'm just going to set a width to this. So we can say width 100. And then what I'll do is put a list. Okay, so this is similar to like a Bootstrap list group. And that uses the ion list tag. All right, so in the ion list we have our items. So let's do ion item, and I'm just going to put in a strong tag here, and we'll say app name. Okay, and we'll say app name is going to be iWeather, and I'll just copy this item here. We'll paste in 2 more. So app name, let's do version. So version is going to be 1.0.0, and then we'll do description. And we'll say simple weather app. Let's save it, and then it should automatically regenerate, and now you can see we have our our data here, our about page. Now don't worry about the style. The style we can change. We're going to change in the SAS files. Actually, it's probably a good thing to do right now. So let's close up about HTML. And then if we look in right here in our app folder, we have our app.scss file. SCSS is an extension for a SAS file. And SAS allows us to use things like variables in our CSS. We can nest styles. We can do all kinds of things. This is not a SAS tutorial, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But let's go ahead and just clear all these comments out of this file for now. And we'll save that. So this is the main SAS file. Now we also have, if we look in theme, the theme folder, there's a variables.scss file. And this is where you can see we have some predefined color variables for our theme, and we can also use other variables. Now I'm going to clean this up a little bit and just get rid of all these comments because we don't need these. Okay, we'll get rid of all these. Just the comments. Get rid of these. Okay, make sure you leave all the imports and all that stuff. All right, so actually we'll get rid of these too. Okay, now if we look at the documentation, let me just pull this up here. Let's say Ionic SAS variables. So this shows all the different variables that you can use, and there's variables for just literally everything: alerts, buttons, cards, fonts, all kinds of stuff. And what we want to work with is basically, I want to change the color of the nav bar here, or the tab bar, also down here where these tabs are. I want to change the background color, and there's predefined SAS variables for a lot of this stuff. So let's go back to the variables file, and to change this header right here, the variable, let me just put a comment here. We'll say top toolbar, and since this is an SCSS file, we can actually have comments like this. And the variable is going to be money sign toolbar dash md dash background. And then what we want to do is set it to a color. Okay, now I want to change some of these hexadecimal values for primary, secondary. So let me do that real quick. So primary is going to be a different shade of blue. It's going to be 6495 ED. Okay, so that's going to be the primary. Secondary is going to be another shade of blue, or kind of grayish, which is going to be 435 D8C, okay, which is going to be that color blue. And then for the light, I'm going to change it from a light gray to just pure white, so just 6 Fs. All right, so that's our color scheme. Now I want to set the toolbar background to the secondary color, which is this darker blue here. Now to access this, you can see it's in parentheses here, and we have all these values. We can access this by doing color, and then we're going to do money sign colors, because that's the name of that variable, and we want to choose the secondary. All right, so let's save that, and you'll see that the header color has changed up here. All right, now let's move on to the bottom tabs. Okay, so for bottom tabs, we want to change the background, so the variable is going to be tabs dash md dash background. And we're going to set it to color. We want to input colors, and then we want to set this to secondary as well. Okay, so we'll save that, and now you'll see that the bar has changed colors. And all of these variables should be accessible on this page here. Let's just do a search here, and we'll say toolbar. There's a ton of them. So toolbar md dash background. You'll see it's right here. Okay, so if you want to look through all these variables, you can, but there's a ton of them. So that takes care of the background. Now we also want to take care of the these tabs here, because now they're kind of unreadable. So the next one I want to do is toolbar dash md dash tab color active. All right, and we're going to set that, let me just copy this. We're going to set that to the light color, which is in our case is white. So let's save that. That actually didn't update. Tab color. Oh, I'm sorry. This should be tabs, not toolbar. There we go. So now the active one you can see is white. All right, so there's a couple more here. I'm just going to paste them in because I don't want to spend too much time on this kind of stuff. So we're going to paste these in. This is going to be the tab color that's not active. This is going to be the text color. Okay, these are both going to be light. And then we also have the list background. Remember on the About page, we have our list. I want that to have the secondary color as the background as well. And also have the text light. So let's save. And now you'll see that the tab bar down here looks different, and also the list here. Now we're going to add some more custom CSS. I could not for the life of me figure out the variable to change the color of the inactive icons. If you guys do know how to do that, let me know, but we're just going to add a custom style for that. All right, so let's go to our app.scss file now, and we're going to add some extra styles. Now the home page, I actually want to have a blue background, so I'm going to add a class. If we go to pages and then home HTML, and we're going to go on to the Ion content tag right here, and we're going to add a class of container. Actually, you know what, let's not do container, let's do home. And then we'll go to our app SCSS file, excuse me, and we'll say .home. And let's give it a background. Now we can also use those variables in this file. Okay, and I want to use the primary color, so what I'll do is just, let's grab this and we'll paste that in. Okay, we'll just change this to primary. And then let's say color. Color I want to be light, so we're going to grab that and we're going to change this to light. And then I also want to just add a margin top and push it down 30 pixels, and we'll save, and there we go. So next thing I want to do is I want to center the toolbar title right here. So we're going to say .toolbar title. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Toolbar dash title, and we're going to say text align center. Okay, that pushes it to the center. Now the inactive tabs down here, we're going to take care of those. So those actually have a class. We're going to say tabs, tabs-md, and then we also want tab-button-icon. And we're just going to make the color CCC, which is a light gray, which didn't work. Why didn't that work? Oh, you know what? There shouldn't be a comma there. Those are connected. There we go. All right. So let's see. The rest of the styles we're going to do have to do with the temp display and all that, which we don't have yet because we haven't actually fetched our data. So now let's work on creating a provider to interact with our API now that we have the basic design down. So we're going to generate a service or a provider. Okay, when I say service and provider, I basically mean the same thing. So we're going to go down here. We're going to say, I almost did ng because I'm so familiar with the Angular CLI. But for Ionic, we're going to do Ionic G provider, and we're going to call this weather. Okay, so we want to do Ionic G provider weather. And if we look up here, now there's a folder called providers with a weather folder and then a weather.ts file. And if we look at that, it looks very similar to just a standard Angular 4 or Angular 2 service. I'm just going to get rid of the comments here. So we bring in injectable. This makes it so that we can inject this as a dependency. It brings in the HTTP module so that we can make HTTP requests. It also brings in the map operator from reactive extensions so that we can use observables and we can use map. Okay, and then it just creates a constructor for us. Now, if we look in the app.module.ts file, you'll see that it actually adds, where is it? Right here. It actually adds the weather provider for us, and then it adds it down here in providers. So we don't actually have to do that manually. What's strange is that when you use Angular 4 and you use the generator, the components you generate are automatically put in here and the services aren't. But with Ionic, the components or pages are not put in automatically, but the services are. So it's kind of strange. Now, the service or provider isn't going to be very advanced at all. We're just going to basically have a get weather function that reaches out, gets the weather, and returns it. So let's go to our weather TS file, which is the provider we just created. And we're going to add, right under the class, we're going to add a property called API key, because we're going to need that. And we're going to set that to whatever your API key is, which should be, you know what, I'm going to separate the app here. All right, and let's make this bigger. So your API key, if you go to documentation, it'll be this right here. It's also under key settings. So I'm going to grab mine. I'm going to copy it. Make sure you use your own because mine probably won't work. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste that in there. And then we're also going to have a URL property. All right. So let's see. We're going to go into our constructor, and we're going to say this.url, talking about this URL property, and we want to set that equal to, and we're going to grab from documentation this right here. Okay, and then we're just going to add some variables in here. So the API key right here, I want to come from here. So what we'll do is get rid of this, and we're going to just concatenate by putting some quotes and then some plus signs, and then we'll say this dot API key. All right, and then I want this to end after the queue. So we're going to get rid of this because that's going to be dynamic. We don't always want San Francisco's weather. We're going to have that come in externally from our components. So we're going to get rid of that, and it's going to end there. Okay, and then what we want to do is create a function under the constructor called getWeather. Okay, and getWeather is going to take in a city and a state. And then what we'll do is we're going to return, and then we'll use the HTTP module. So we're going to say this.http.get because we want to make a GET request, and it's going to be to this.url, which is going to grab this right here, and then we want to attach the city and state onto it. So after where this ends, we're going to say plus to concatenate a slash, and then we're going to concatenate state, which is going to come in from the parameters, and then we want another slash, and then concatenate city. Okay, now if we look at the endpoint, it's actually the city.json, so we have to include that .json. So again, we're going to concatenate .json, just like that. Now this is going to return an observable, so we actually want to use the map operator. That's why we're bringing in map up here. So we're going to go on to the next line and say .map, and we want to map the result to result.json. Okay, and that's going to return an observable. So what we want to do is in the component where we want to display our weather, when we want to get the response, we just want to subscribe to this observable so that we can fetch that data. All right, hopefully you guys are still with me. So let's go ahead and save this, and this is actually it. This should be it for our provider, for our service. So I'm going to go ahead and close it. Now the component or the page we want to use our service with is the home page. That's where all of our weather stuff is going to go. So let's go to pages. We'll go to home.ts. Okay, so this is our home page component. Now what we want to do is we want to bring in our service provider. I'm just going to make this smaller down here. Actually, I'll just close this up for now. So we want to bring in the provider. So let's do import we're going to import the weather provider. Now this is coming from, if we look at our provider weather.ts file, it's this right here. You want to use whatever's right here. So weather provider, and it's going to be from /// you want to go out 2 folders up into providers, into the weather folder, into the weather component. All right. Now that we've done that, we need to inject this as a dependency. So in Angular, when you inject a dependency, it goes into the constructor parameters. So we're going to put a comma right here, and we're going to say private weather, and actually weather provider, and we're going to set it to uppercase W, weather provider. Okay, because that's what we brought it in as up here. So now we have that service injected. And if I go ahead and save this, and we go and we open up the console over here with F12, let's see, we're getting an error here. Okay, so we're getting an error that says no provider for HTTP. The reason for this is because it's not, HTTP is a module that needs to be brought in for us to use it. It needs to be brought into app.module.ts. Okay, you can think of this app.module file as a meeting place for everything. Modules, services, components, everything. So we're going to go ahead and bring that in by saying import HTTP module, and that's going to be from Angular/HTTP, and then we just need to add it down here to the imports. That's where any modules go that you bring in. All right, and we'll save that, and that should fix that error, hopefully. All right, there we go. So now if we look down here, you're going to see hello weather provider, because it's now linked to the home component. And if we look in our provider file, it's coming from this console log right here. So we know that that provider is connected to the home component. So now we're going to get ready to call the getWeather function that's in our provider from the home component. So we're going to need to specify a location. We're also going to need to specify a property to fill with the weather that comes in from the API. So right in the component class here, we're going to say weather, and I'm just going to set that to the type of any. And then we're also going to have a location, which is going to be an object that's going to have a city, which will be a string, and it's also going to have a state, which will be a string. All right, now how we're going to do this is we're going to store the location in something called Ionic Storage, which is actually part of Ionic, and it works very, very similar to local storage, HTML5 local storage, except it's asynchronous. All right, but for now, we're just going to manually set the location. We're not going to use storage just yet. Now, we could do this in the constructor, but there are lifecycle methods that we can hook into that are recommended. For instance, there's one called IonView will enter. So we're going to say IonView will enter, and this is basically going to fire off whenever the component's loaded. Okay, this is very similar to ng on init if you're familiar with Angular. So in here is where we're just going to say this dot location, talking about this right here, this object, and we're just going to set it to, let's say, city. We'll set it to city Miami, and we'll set it to state FL. Okay, so when this component is loaded, it's going to take this location property and fill it with this city and state. Now that by itself isn't going to do anything. What we need to do is we need to now call that provider function, that getWeather function, to actually reach out to the API and get the weather. So let's go right under where we define the location, and we're going to say this dot weather provider, okay, because that's what we defined it as right here. So this dot weather provider, and then we want to call the getWeather function that's in that provider. You'll see it'll automatically show up right here in the IntelliSense. So getWeather, remember it takes in a city and state. If we look at it right here, city and state, and that's going to come from this city and state. So we're going to say this dot location dot city, and then this dot location dot state. All right, now remember, it's going to return an observable. So observables are basically data streams. So we need to subscribe to that stream, to that observable. So we're going to say dot subscribe, and then inside these parentheses, we're going to put weather. That's what we're going to return it as, and we're going to use an arrow function like that. Let me just turn on wrap here. Let's see, there we go, so you guys can see everything. All right, so we're subscribing to it, we're getting the response, we're calling it weather, and then let's just do a console log here to see what it actually gives us. All right, we'll save that, and then we should see something down here. So here's the response, and then it gives us this object called current observation, and if we look in there, that's where all of the stuff is that we need. Okay, all of the heat index, the temperatures, the icons, all that response that we saw. Where is it? Right here. Oh. Okay, so it's all of this stuff, and we're getting it. We now have it in our application. So what we want to do is we want to assign the current observation object to this weather. Okay, this weather property. So instead of console logging, let's say this dot weather and set it to the weather that's coming in, the result that's coming in, and then current observation. So now we're going to have all that data available to us from within the home page template. So now we can go to home.html. We can get rid of all this crap here, and we're going to once again use the grid. So let's say ion-grid. Now, I don't want any of this to load unless the weather, unless that data is loaded, unless it's come back. So we're going to put an ngIf right here. So asterisk ngIf, and we're going to set this equal to weather. Okay, so it's going to check for that data before this even loads. Otherwise, we'll get an error. All right, so let's put a row in here. We'll say ion row, and then we're going to put a column. Okay, so this column, I'm actually going to set the width to, we're going to say width dash 50, and then we're going to offset it so that we push it to the middle. So we'll say offset 25. All right, and then we'll put an H2. Let's give it a class of location, and then we can grab our data. Okay, so in here, we're going to put double curly braces. This is just standard Angular string interpolation. Basically allows us to put dynamic data inside of our template, and we're going to say weather. Okay, remember, we're getting that data, we're putting it in the weather property, and we want the display underscore location dot full. Okay, now let me show you where this comes from. So it's coming from the data that's returned, which I'm not logging down here anymore, so I'm just going to pull up the doc page here, and let's see, we're looking at current observation, display location, and then full. So it should give us the city and the state. So let's just go ahead and save this and see if it actually works. And there we go. So we're getting the display location, which is Miami, Florida. All right, so let's add the rest of the data here, and then we'll style it. So we're going to put a div with the class of icon, and then we want to get the image. Okay, now the source for this is going to come from that weather object that's returned, and it's going to be under icon underscore URL. Okay, which if we look at the documentation here, we should see, I think it's down at the bottom right here, icon URL, which is going to point to whatever the condition is, in this case partly cloudy. All right, if I save that, there it is. And under that we want the description, which is going to be like the partly cloudy or sunny or whatever it may be. So we're going to put that in an H3 with the class of DESC for description, and then we'll say weather.weather. Save that. Okay, we get mostly cloudy. Then we're going to have an h1 with the class of temp. And I want the Fahrenheit temperature for this, so I'm going to say weather.temp_F. And then I want the little degree symbol, which we can get with ampersand DEG semicolon. So we'll save that, and there we go. So now under that, we're going to have a list with some of the other stuff like the humidity, Celsius, things like that. So we're going to put in another row. So let's go right here, and we'll say ion row. Okay, and then we're going to do ion-call. And let's see, we're going to make this one a width 100. And let's do ion list, ion-list. Okay, then we want an item. And we're going to put a strong tag with the temp. Okay, so temp, which comes from our weather object, and it's going to be temperature string. Oops. Okay, save that. There we go. There's our temperature string. Let's copy the ion item, paste it in a couple more times. This next one is actually going to be relative humidity, and that comes from relative_humidity. Okay, then we have dew point. That's going to be dew point string. Okay, and all of this stuff, again, I'm getting from the response. Okay, and you can add other stuff if you want. I mean, there's more. There's wind string, wind direction, pressure, wind chill, feels like. There's all kinds of stuff. So you can pick and choose what you want. Just use whatever that value is. All right, so dew point. Let's also do visibility. So it's going to be visibility_mi because we want it in miles. And then we'll do heat index, which is going to be heat_index_string. All right. And there we go. So now let's finish styling up this page right here. So we'll go back to our app.scss file. And let's do the temp. Okay, we gave it a class of temp. And we're going to set the font size to 90 pixels. Let's set the text align. Oops. We'll say text align to center. We'll set the font weight to normal. Okay, now we're going to take everything. We're going to take the location. Okay, dot location. We're going to take the icon. We gave it a class of icon, and then the description. And I want to just align it all to the center. So text align center. Okay, we'll save that. Oh, I forgot the comma right there. There we go. And let's see what else. Let's make the image a little bigger. So we'll say the class of icon and the image inside of it. We want to set the width to, let's say, 100 pixels. And then I also want to set the location. We're going to set the font size to 40 pixels. And then let's set the description font size to 30 pixels. And there we go. So there's our home page. I just want to change the title up here from home. So let's go to our home.html and we'll just change that to iWeather and save. Alright guys, so now what we want to do is we don't want, let's go back to home TS. We don't want the location to just be hard coded like this. We want to use some kind of storage, and Ionic has something called Ionic Storage, which works like local storage, and it works in Android, it works on iOS, so it's completely cross-platform. It also works in the browser, which is great. We don't even need a simulator to test it out. So we're gonna bring it in up here. All right, first of all, we need to bring it into app.module.ts. Okay, anything we use, we need to bring into this file. So let's go right under where we brought in the HTTP module, and we're going to import. It's going to be Ionic Storage module, and that's going to be from Ionic/storage. Okay, now we have to bring this down into the imports, just like we do with any other module. So we're going to say Ionic Storage module, and then we just need to do this .for root parentheses. Okay, and that's all we need to do in this file. So let's save it. Let's go back to home.ts, and from here we're going to bring in storage. So let's say import storage. It's going to be from Ionic Storage. Okay, now we need to inject this as a dependency, just like we did with the weather provider. I'm just going to put these on separate lines like that. So we'll put a comma right here, and then we're going to say private storage and set that to capital S storage. All right, and then we can use it. So let's go down here. Now, in the Ion will view enter, what we're going to do, I'm just going to go like this, and we're going to say this.storage.get. So basically, when you want to get something from storage, you use this.storage.get. When you want to set something, you use this.storage.set. So we want to get the value of location. Okay, now remember, there's nothing there yet. We haven't set anything in location. Now this is completely asynchronous, so it actually returns a promise. So we have to go .then like that, and then this is going to take in, we're going to put another set of parentheses, a parameter, a value called val, and then an arrow function, and then in here we can grab onto this value. Okay, so whatever is stored in the location is going to be in this val. Okay, and then what we want to do is test to see if there's anything there, because if there isn't, then we need a default, and that's where this Miami, Florida is going to come in. But everything has to be done within this .then because it's asynchronous. So let's do a test here. We'll say if val is not equal to null. Okay, we want an else. Yeah. So if val is not equal to null, and we'll take care of this after, but for now we know that it is equal to null. So what do we want to do? We want to just set this default value. So we're going to cut it from here, and we're going to put it in the else like that. Okay, now since this is asynchronous, this whole thing right here where we called get weather, this has to go within this .then or it's not going to work. So let's go ahead and just cut that whole thing. All right, and then we want to put that right here, okay, after the if statement. And we'll just clean that up a little bit. All right, so yeah, I think that's good. So that ends there, that ends there, that's the class, good. All right, so if we go ahead and save this, it should still work, hopefully. Maybe not. Cannot read property city of undefined. All right, you know what? Apparently we do need to put what we need here. Now, when we save location, right, when this is put into the storage, it's going to be saved as an object like this. Okay, now when you save something in local storage, whether it's HTML5 local storage or Ionic Storage, it has to be saved as a string. Okay, so when it's stored in there, it's going to be a string. However, when we get it, we want to parse it as JSON so that we can access it as an object. So what we're going to do is set this dot location, and we want to just wrap the value in a function called JSON.parse. Okay, because that's going to take the string that it's stored as and then turn it into JSON so that we can access, you know, location.city.state, just like we do here. So let's go ahead and save that. Okay, now we're getting Boston, Mass because I actually already had something saved in my in the browser in Ionic Storage from when I was creating this. So let me just clear that out, and I'll show you how to do that actually, which is probably a good thing anyway. So if we go to our Chrome tools, go to application, and it's actually under IndexedDB. You'll see this Ionic Storage. Okay, and this is where it gets stored in the browser. So I'm just going to delete database. You guys won't have this. Okay, but I already had some data stored in there, the Boston, Mass, so I'm just going to delete that. All right, so I deleted that, and now if I reload, it should go back to Miami, okay, which is the default. So you guys, honestly, you guys probably didn't even get that error at first, because since I already had something, it already found something in the value, there was nothing here. That's why I was getting the error. You guys didn't have anything, so it should have loaded this. So hopefully that's not too confusing. All right, now that that's working, we want to be able to change this. Okay, we want to change the location, and that's all going to be done within settings. So what we're going to do now is go to our settings.ts file. Let's get rid of this comment here. And then remember, settings is going to have a form with a city and a state field. So what I'm going to do is add two properties for our settings page class. One will be city, which will be a string, and one will be state, which will be a string. Okay, now we want to, actually, you know what, let's, I'm trying to think of how I want to do this. Let's just go into the constructor, and let's manually just say this dot city equals Miami, and this dot state equals FL. All right, and then we're gonna go and create the settings form, because right now if we click on settings, there's nothing there. So let's go to settings HTML. I'm just gonna put an uppercase S here, and then we're gonna go into our content, and we're going to add a grid. Okay, in the grid we're going to have a row. In the row we're going to have a column. Column is going to be width 100. Okay, let's see. So in the column, let's put a list. We're going to put the form inside of a list. Okay, so ion list, and then let's say form, and this is going to have an ng submit. So when this form is submitted, we want to call a function called save form. All right, so when it's submitted, it'll call that function, which we'll create in a minute. But let's finish out the form. So we're going to put an ion item here. Okay, inside here, let's put a label. So ion-label. All this stuff is in the documentation too, by the way. I'm going to set this to be fixed. And this is going to be the label for the city. Under the label, we'll have the input, which is going to be, you guessed it, ion input. If I can spell right. Okay, so ion input, and we're going to use an ng model here, just like with standard Angular. We're going to set that to the city value. This also needs a name attribute set to the same thing, city. And then let's give this a type of text. So ng model is a directive for two-way data binding. Basically what we're saying is that this input should be bound to this property, okay? So we have it set as Miami in the constructor, so the actual input value should be by default Miami. All right, now let's go back to settings and let's go ahead and add the state, which is going to be basically the same thing. I'm going to copy this ion item and we'll paste it here. Let's change this to state. We're going to say ng model state because we want to bind it to the state property. All right, and then let's go under the ion item and we'll put our button. Okay, so for the button, let's say ion dash button. It's going to give it a type of submit so that it actually submits the form, and then we want it to display as a block. So let's save that. If we go to settings, there we go, and you'll see that it's already pre-filled with Miami, Florida, because we did our two-way data binding with ng model here and here. Now, we don't want this, again, think of what we did on the home page. We don't want this to just be hard-coded data, right? We want it to come from Ionic Storage. So we're going to do the same thing in our settings page. We're going to bring in our storage. Okay, we also need to add that as a dependency. So in the constructor, we'll put a comma right here and we'll say private storage, set that to uppercase S storage. All right. So we're going to do pretty much the same thing that we did in the home TS. Let's get rid of this and we're going to do this dot get. I'm sorry, this dot storage dot get location. Okay, remember this is asynchronous, it returns a promise, so we want to do dot then, and then inside here we're going to have a value that's returned, put an arrow function, and then we're going to test for that value. So we'll say if the val is not equal to null, so basically if there's something there, then what do we want to do? We're gonna create a variable called location and set it to json.parse whatever that value is, okay? And then we're gonna set this dot city equal to location dot city and set this dot state equal to location dot state. Okay, now we're going to say else, if there's nothing in that location object, then we'll just set this dot city to Miami or whatever you want for the default, and this dot state to FL. All right, so basically doing the same thing we did on the home page, except we don't have a this dot location property. We're using separate city and state on the settings for the separate inputs. Okay, so let's save that, and we should still get Miami because there's nothing in, there's nothing in the storage location yet. So the last thing we want to do is we want to make it so that if we change this and save it, then this gets updated, this location object in the storage. So remember, we had it go to a function called saveForm. So let's go ahead and add that, and what we'll do is we'll create a variable called location, set it to an object, and set city to this dot city, because whatever we type in here is going to be bound to this dot city, okay, which is the city property of this component. So whatever we type in there, this is going to be it when we submit it. Same thing with state. So let's say state, set that to this dot state. All right. And just to test this out, let's just do a console.log, and we'll say log location. All right, so let's go to settings and open up our console. And let's just we'll change this to, we'll just say Boston, Mass, and save. And this is what's getting submitted, an object with city and state. So what we want to do now is we want to save our storage, our location, as that. So let's go ahead and get rid of the console log, and we're going to say this.storage, and instead of get, we're going to set it. Okay, so this storage set, we want to set the location. Now remember, it has to be stored as a string, and this is an object, so before we submit, we just want to run it through a function called json.stringify, which will turn it into a string, like that. All right, and then the last thing we want to do is navigate back to the home page, and we can do that by using the nav controller. So this nav control.push. Now, if we want to redirect to the home page, we actually need to bring that in up here. So we're going to import home page from, and let's see, we want to do just // go out one into the home folder into the home component, and then we can just pass that in here like that. All right, so let's go ahead and try it out. We'll save, and let's just reload for good luck, and we'll go to settings, change it to Boston, Mass, and save, and there we go. Now if I reload, it's still Boston, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so it's now being stored in Ionic Storage. So our application is now essentially finished as far as the functionality goes. So I'm going to close all this up. And like I said, if you're on a Mac, you can do your iOS simulator, but you're going to have to run it with Cordova. So let's actually open up, let's say Ionic build app, and you might want to look through this documentation. Let's see, testing your app. Okay, so this is obviously this is what we've done. Ionic serves it up in the browser. Now to test it, if you're on a Mac, you can do Ionic Cordova build iOS. Actually, no, you don't want to do that just yet. You want to do run iOS, I believe. I think. I mean, we're going to do run Android. I think you can do run iOS, or is it prepare iOS? I'm not much of a Mac user, but just try that. You can. I know that it's easy to run it in the iOS simulator, but what we're going to do is we're going to run it in the Android simulator. Now, in order for this to work, like I said, you need to have the Android Studio installed and the Android SDK. You also have to create a virtual device. Now, I already have the Android Studio and all that installed, but I will show you how to create a virtual device. So let me just close that. So close that. Now, once you download Android Studio, and of course you can do this on a Mac as well. A Mac you can test with Android and iOS. It's just on Windows you can't test with iOS. So let's open up Android Studio. And by the way, I do have a tutorial showing you how to set up Android Studio. It is a little old. I think it's a year old, so there may be some errors, but they shouldn't be too hard to figure out. Now, this is Android Studio. This is a complete IDE for building Java apps and real Android apps. We're not going to use this whatsoever. What I want to do is go up to this little icon. Where is it? Virtual Device Manager. Yeah, right here, AVD Manager. And we'll click on that. And this is your virtual devices. You can see I already have one here, this Nexus 5, but what you can do is create a virtual device. You probably won't have one, and we can just click. You can choose a device. I would just use the default Nexus 5. Click next, and you want to choose your SDK. I'm using version 7.0 Nugget or Nougat, whatever, and click next. And you can set up some stuff here. I would leave the defaults. Click finish, and then you have a virtual device. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play my virtual device with this play button. So it's going to launch the emulator. Oh, it's already running. Oh, it's already starting up. All right, so my emulator is now starting up. Okay, so now that it's started up, what I'm going to do is go back into my command line. Okay, this is where Ionic Serve is running. I'm going to stop it with Control C, and then we're going to do, just go back to, let's see, where were we? The heck is it? Testing. Right here, I'm going to do Ionic Cordova run Android, and that should run it in the virtual device. And it could take a minute. And there we go. So it's being run. Now, the reason that mine is set to Orlando, Florida, yours is most likely set to Miami, is because I already had this app running before it and it saved the storage. Okay, so Orlando was already saved, but you should be able to go to your About page. You should be able to go to Settings, and let's try changing this. So we'll set it to, let's say, New York, NY, save, and there we go. Alright, so our app is working on Android. Now, I'm not going to really go in much further than this, but I would suggest looking at this guide here. This is kind of the publishing guide. If we go down to publishing your app, you can actually build out your, where is it? You can build out your APK file, which is basically like the file you upload to the app stores and all that. You do need to sign it. So you need to run these commands to sign it, and then you can actually upload it to the Google Play Store. All right, and it looks like it costs $25 to upload compared to Apple's $99. So if you publish it in iOS and you upload it to the Apple App Store, you'll have to pay a $99 fee. I think it's a one-time fee, and then you can upload as many apps as you want. But this goes into depth with like publishing with Xcode on a Mac and all that stuff. All right, but basically you've built a hybrid app. Let's go ahead and we'll run the build command here. So let's see. We'll go ahead and we'll say Ionic Cordova build, and we want to add on the flag release, and we're building it to Android. What this should do is it should take our application and it should compile it all into an APK file, and then that's your app. That's your Android app. Okay, so it says it's in Brad Projects, iWeather Platforms. So let's just navigate to that folder real quick. Let's see. So we want to go users, Brad, where is it? Projects. Yours will obviously be in a different, wherever you put your app. And then it's going to be in platforms. You see we have this Android folder, and then we have build, outputs, APK, and there it is. So this is our unsigned APK. Okay, and like I said, you want to go and run these commands to sign the APK, and then you can proceed to upload it to the Play Store if you want to do that. I wouldn't suggest uploading this particular app because it's not really production ready. There's room for errors and stuff like that. So if you want to use this as like a prototype to build a production level application, that's fine. But I think that's going to be it, guys. This video has been quite long, but I didn't want to really break it up. I wanted to do it all in one shot. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and hopefully you learned quite a bit from it. Hybrid apps are really the future because we have this application and we can now publish it for Android as well as iOS. Okay, we don't have to spend a lot of time and money on creating a Swift app for iOS and then a Java app for Android. Okay, that's what's great about hybrid apps. So thanks for watching, guys. If you liked it, please leave a like, please subscribe. If you're interested in supporting me further, check out my Patreon in the description, and thanks for watching. So if you guys really like my videos and you learn a lot from them and maybe you have a couple extra dollars to spare, check out my Patreon page. I'm working on creating special content for patrons. You also get special deals on future courses, and there's even an email support tier for all YouTube videos and projects. To learn more, visit patreon.com/traversymedia.